routine, so that's what I wanted to do. So as the bishop said, I will be reporting on the audit report that you had in section B, pages 1 to 20, and the Synod's financial statements on pages 21 to 23, in case you didn't look at that previously. I hope that some of you were on the Zoom that we did for the Finance and Budget meeting on Thursday, April 27th, and there you got a little bit more detail into our finances, because today it will be a shorter version that we're doing. And that's something that was good, I think, out of our pandemic, that we had to do certain things on Zoom. And some of you really want to know a little bit more about the finances than I really have time to spend here when I'm up here. So on the 27th, we had the Zoom where other people were able to come on. We had some nice discussions, some nice questions, which are always welcome. And even now, I mean, if you do have some more detailed questions, and maybe you don't feel like, oh, I want to bring that all up in the assembly, you can always search me out, and I can, answer to the best of my ability what concerns you might have. I want to thank really every individual and every congregation for your support. As we just learned from the ELCA presentation, we're all in this partnership together. Our individuals, our congregations, our synod, the ELCA, we all work together to do God's love in the Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod. So I want to thank you for that. And if you want to see more about your particular church, then you go to the report of the statistician, which is in section 09, section C. And then you'll see what your mission support was, what your receipts are, what your expenses are, etc. I want to thank our senior accountant, Martin Schwab. I'm not sure if he's here in this area, for his outstanding work as senior accountant, who has given me, I could not do this job without Martin, that's for sure. I also want to thank our finance chairperson, who you'll be meeting in a couple minutes, Bert Glenn, for his excellent leadership, and his term is ending with the Synod Council, and I personally am sad. You've been a great gift to our council. I want to let you know that. Thank John Heidgard. He's out here somewhere. He is the chair of our investment committee, and he is giving us great guidance and helping us in new ways that are really important to the Synod in general. So thank you very much, John. Okay. Now, we will move to the first slide, which is the statement of financial position. So the statement of financial position is a statement that says what were our assets and our liabilities on one date, and that was our fiscal year end, which is January 31st, 2023. So you'll see on there we've summarized it, what we have in cash and investments and what our total assets are. Now you can see there's a decrease from 2022 to 23. That is due to our markets. That does not have anything to do with us personally, but because of what's been happening in the markets, we have a decrease in our investments as well. I'm sure you've realized that in your own investments, in your retirement plans. They're maybe not what they were before, and that's kind of what's happened to us too. But on the other side, we'll talk about that later, about some other positives. The other assets that we have are real estate, some accounts receivable, etc. Liabilities we have are small. They're only $142,000, and that's really just our accounts payable from one month to the next. Hi out there. Our net assets have 796,000 that are temporarily restricted, and that means that over time we try to use those because they are donor restricted, and then we have our permanently restricted, which we receive income from those, and those are long-term trusts that we own. So that kind of gives you a synopsis of where we stand, where we can show you what our total assets are and then what our liabilities are, so you can see that the Synod is in a good financial position. The next slide will be our statement of revenues. Good. Okay, and you can see there what we have for our mission support, our other contributions, etc. And so we're looking at, from the mission support, is what we're getting from you, our congregations. Now, we did have a decrease this year of $70,000. So you will see when we get to the budget that for the following year, we're not budgeting as high as an amount because of the decrease we realized this year. However, on the other side, we did have an increase in our other contributions. And some of these are bequests that we receive from people who have died and give us unrestricted bequests to the Synod. And that has helped us. And some of them, one we received just said God's work, which was wonderful. And that particular person had been a member of Emmanuel Burr Home, which actually had closed. So we're still remembered when it comes to people who have passed away. So that was a real benefit to us this year because some of those funds were unrestricted. You also know in your churches you probably get an appeal for All Saints. That has helped as well. So we've had an increase in our All Saints giving. And then there were other things, like during the pandemic when we had the Blessed to Be a Blessing fund. We ended up using those funds to help people. So those are the kinds of things that we have in other contributions. The other two, the registration fees, they're down, and that's just because, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't have the same activities we've had in the past. So a lot of times that would be like our youth activities, youth events that they do. Well, we didn't have that. Even with assembly and convocation and different things, different activities were down, so we didn't have registration fees like we've had in the past, but that will be changing. There were significant, as I mentioned, on the assets. You can see here we show the negatives on the investment income and the beneficial interest in trust. So there you can see these are unrealized losses that we've had due to the markets. And under property, we had no properties that were sold in 2023. In 24, there will be a property being sold from a church that was closed last year. So that will be coming up in the budget when Bert brings that forward. The next slide is our statement of expenses. And keep going forward. Those were part of the report for March 27th. Back one, I think. Yeah, there we go. The statement of activities expenses. So here you can see that our operating expenses have increased by $167,000. And that is because we now have full staffing for the Synod. We also had tried to increase the salaries and benefits. We keep trying to do that. And then we had other cost expenses coming out of the pandemic. So for instance, during the pandemic, we couldn't be in the office. So we were able to work on an arrangement with the seminary that we did not pay rent during that time period. So, and then hopefully you all got that question. Well, no, what was it? 50% of the people actually know where our offices are. We're now in the Brosman, and so we're paying rent now again, and we're back, and we've renovated the area that we needed so that it's the way we want it to be. Property management. Property management, what is there is those are cemeteries of some of the churches that have closed, and we still own those cemeteries and maintain those cemeteries. So those are the cemeteries of St. James Chalfont, St. John's Quakertown, and St. Michael's Germantown. Then we also had some expenses for the church that closed last year, Bethany Roxborough. So what we do is we pay the expenses until the building gets sold. You know, you have to keep up your insurance and taking care of the property, et cetera, during that time period. So that's what's in property management. Our distribution to agencies, those are things like Muhlenberg College, the United Lutheran Seminary, Campus Ministry, Bear Creek Camp, Lutheran Advocacy, and Lutheran Congregational Services. So that's what goes into that number. Then we have what's called remittance to designated agencies, and that is when a church gives the Synod money and we give that money out for the designated purpose. So in this case, these were both hunger type. One was to the deaf ministry out in Westchester, and one was to hunger ministries. So that's what remittance to other agencies is. And the last one is grants to organizations. And grants to organizations, they basically have, it's $213,000, and it's grants for student loan debt, it's the Forward Together in Faith grants, it's ELCA grants to congregations, and it's, as you just heard from ELCA, it's the Well, it's Grace Broomall, Kairos, Welcome Church. All of those ministries are part of that. I did forget, I forgot to even mention our ELCA proportionate share. 50% of what we get for mission support goes to the ELCA. Now, not on the screen, I just want to talk about our mission expenses, because you've heard in the last couple of years, we have had some churches that have closed. And what has happened is once the church closes, then we evaluate the property, and then the properties get sold, and 15% of that, goes into our Synod budget, but the rest of it goes into our mission fund. And our mission funds our expenses have increased for the mission fund because we have 2 directors of evangelical mission. And what happens is we get paid through the ELCA, comes to the Synod gives that money to their congregations, and then the congregation ends up paying them the salary out of that. So that's the new system that Bishop Davenport devised. Some of the mission budget were funds given to mission congregations, and you're going to hear the same words: the Well, the Kairos Community, the Welcome Church, Grace Broomall, and other congregations that you also saw: New Creation, Atonement, St. Michael's Philadelphia, and Mediator. So in this, I'm trying to tell you a story, and the story is that we're sharing what God has given to us. So we're sharing what the members you have given to your church. Your church is sharing that with the Synod. The Synod is sharing that with churches within the Synod, but also with the ELCA. And we're in partnership with one another. Hopefully you can see that we're not just a Synod that is rigid and doesn't know what's going on out there. And I praise Brian Penman and Moses Dennis for the work they're doing with the vitality, Brian with the vitality. Yeah. You know, we hear about the Urban Ministry Task Force and the difficulties. We know there are other churches that are also having difficulties, and the Vitality team is doing a great job. And I just wanted to, okay, so at that, does anybody have any questions before I move on? Okay, well, that's good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to present the audit opinion from Tate, Weller, and Baker. You want to show that on the screen? Okay, I'll just read it then. We have audited the accompanying financial statements of Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the Synod, which comprise the statement of financial position as of January 31st, 2023, and the related statements of activities and cash flows for the year then ended, and the related notes to the financial statements. In our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the Synod as of January 31st, 2023, and the changes in its net assets and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. On behalf of the Synod Council, I put the following resolution before the Assembly. Therefore, be it resolved that the Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod accepts the audit report for the fiscal year ending January 31st, 2023. Do they need to vote on that? Okay.
Well, first of all, thank you for that report. Always grateful to hear about, I don't know about you all, but I want to know what's happening with the money. I'm just saying. So you have before you the audit report. Are we ready to vote? You have your devices.
Yep, do it on your device.
Everyone get your device in your hand. Vote now. Open the vote. Is everyone good? We voted. Close the vote. Amen. And the audit passes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Excuse me. Let me just say this before you leave. I think you're dressed appropriately. And I hope that many will join us for Lutheran Day at the Phillies on May 20th. And May 3rd was your birthday, and happy birthday to you. Report of the Finance Committee. I now ask Mr. Albert Burt Glenn, I call him Brother Burt, member of St. John Melrose Park and chairperson of the Finance Committee, to present the budget for the coming year, January 31, 2020. The fiscal year, I want to be clear on this, ending January 31, 2025.
Thank you, Bishop. Yeah, Janet, I forgot my Giants cap this afternoon, but, you know, that's... Well, if we were in San Francisco...
He stands up for his team.
All right. I'd like to begin by thanking the members of the Finance Committee, Pia Graham, Everett Wick, and Sandra Zimmerman, for their devotion and showing up at all our meetings. We, Finance Committee, serves the role of collaboration, some lay input and oversight to the good work that Janet and Martin do in compiling all of the statements. So I'd like to thank those members of the committee for their work. Particularly, of course, I want to thank Janet for her efforts, all the time she spends being sure these things are in order and then explaining it to us and getting us to know it. And I want to especially thank Martin Schwab, who is the senior accountant for the Synod. Yeah, let's give him a round of applause. He's here. He was out front handing out voting devices this morning, but his real expertise is accounting, and he does that so well. And I want to thank him for two things. One is, of course, keeping track of all this stuff appropriately, doing such a good job of that, and especially for explaining it to me and to the members of the committee as we prepare our review of Synod finances in our committee. That's the first thing. And the second thing is I want to thank him for his patience when I ask him all these questions and then ask him the questions again the next month and again. But he always, he's very patient, gives all the answers so that I know what's going on. And so I appreciate that. I want to thank the bishop, too. Bishops don't always attend finance committee meetings, but this bishop has been to, I think, every one. Yeah, she wants to keep an eye on the money. So. And not only is it good for her to be there, and it's great to hear from her and get to know her a little bit, but now and then she sort of gives us some little insight about what's going on in the Synod, too. So we learn a few secrets that way as well. So it's good. All right, on to our substance. Pastor Carl Richard yesterday said that he thought that one of the highlights, best parts of the assembly were the amendments to the Constitution, the Synod Constitution. Well, I think consideration of the Synod budget is right up there in that same category. So let's go right on to the Synod budget then. So we have the first slide, which is on the screen. For the Synod budget, we, of course, are projecting what we will be receiving and what we will be spending in the next fiscal year. And as the bishop said, that's a little ways away. That goes from the end of January 2024 to the end of January 2025. But we have a long history of the Synod operation. Janet and Martin look at that. And so we can make pretty good estimates of what we will need to spend and what we will be receiving. I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail because Janet did in presenting the audit report and in reviewing what we have been spending and receiving in the last 2 fiscal years. That's really the same as what we project to be receiving and spending in the next fiscal year, with slight upticks for inflation. And we have specifically included in our budget, we'll get to the expenses in a minute, but we explicitly recognize inflation and want to be sure that Synod staff salaries keep up with that. So first, the budget income. What you see on the screen there is on the far right is what we project as our budgeted income for fiscal year beginning in February of 2024. And it tracks pretty closely what you can see we received in 2022, with the exceptions for the things that Janet spoke about. We had some particularly high bequests in 2022 for other contributions. And the investment income, of course, was down in 2022 as a result of the markets. We try to project what's more normal market activity for 2024. And then the proceeds from sale of church property, we had no properties being sold in 2022. We expect Bethany Roxborough to be sold in 2023. And then in the budget year that we're looking at now, there's a projected church closure in June of this year, and we would expect that that property likely will be sold in the budget year that we're looking at. So that's the budget income that we're looking at for 2024. The next slide should show us the budget expenses. Oh, maybe we could, yeah, we've got the Zoom. There we go, budget expenses for 2024. So again, there's nothing unusual or remarkable here. A little uptick in operating expenses for inflation. The proportionate share is, of course, 1/2 of the income we expect from mission support. As Janet said, we moved the mission support down just a little bit for 2024 because of our experience last year. We're not saying you should reduce your mission support. We're happy to see a higher figure for mission support in 2024 as things recover, and we use half of it for mission and support of this synod, and of course send half on to the ELCA. Property management, Janet explained, and she told you what the agencies were that we contribute to. That's mission like, the seminary, Muhlenberg College, and others. The designated agencies are sort of pass-throughs. We do a lot of mission, of course, and the grants to organizations. So those are the budgeted expenses for 2024. That is then what we expect to spend to keep our synod running and doing all of God's work at the synod level. And as you know from what Janet reported and from what you've been seeing here in the last couple of days, a whole lot of that is really mission and mission related. And that's just something to cheer about, I think. Are there any questions for me, budget related? Oh, we might have one. Microphone 3, please, and
Yes.
Speak loudly and slowly. It's kind of hard to hear up here.
Thank you. Bruce Davidson from Christ Ascension Lutheran Church in Philadelphia. I had a question about the cut in support for designated agencies.
I'm sorry. Oh, designated
The cut in
agencies?
support for designated agencies is a decrease. Could you indicate which agencies and how that decision was made?
Yeah, the one that is remittance to designated agencies is fairly limited, but that is the pass-through. We get money from a congregation, I think it's Calvary, and that is designated when it comes to us to go to the Christ the King Deaf Church.
Okay.
And so we pass it on to them. And there may be one other small agency like that, but that's a pass-through.
Okay, that's not the support of deaf ministry, Lutheran advocacy, those kinds of things. Is that right?
Well, the designated agency one is a very specific pass-through coming
Okay.
from that one congregation. We have other mission support items that come in another part of the budget.
Yes.
And those are in a larger category on this screen of mission support.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, I'm Zenas Savage, voting layman from Emmanuel Lutheran Pottstown. My question is, what was the rate of inflation that the Synod Finance Committee determined and was effective for calculating the budget? And would you recommend that in our own congregations, should we be using the same rate?
We didn't really do a mathematical calculation. I would note that an indication of inflation is that last year, those who received Social Security increases, those who have federal government pensions got an 8.7% increase in the payments. So that's an indication of where the inflation level was. One of the lines, maybe you'd call it a micro line, in the expanded budget figures, is a sum which we set aside to provide increases to Synod staff salaries, and the bishop has some discretion in how that gets distributed. And that was, I think, at $25,000, and we increased it to $35,000 for this next year because of that significant rate of inflation. So it wasn't like we multiplied 8.7%, but we wanted to provide a little additional funding. In terms of congregational work, there are guidelines for pastoral compensation, for example, which include clearly salary. Those you can get through the deans or the synod office, and those do go up as well. I know there's going to be an increase next year for those, but you also, of course, have to take into account all kinds of things that you take into account at your own congregation level. And you should, of course, be aware that inflation is inflation. That would affect housing allowances. If there's a parsonage, that's a little different situation. But we just tried to be sensitive to that inflation factor when we were preparing this budget for 2024. Any other questions? Okay, if not, then I will put the appropriate language on the record here. On behalf of the Synod Council, I put the following resolution before the Synod Assembly. Therefore, be it resolved that the Southeastern Pennsylvania Synod adopts the budget for the coming year, fiscal year ended January 31, 2025. Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you. Hearing there no one else is at the mic, no more discussion, please open the vote. Let Pastor Eisenhart get to his instrument. Are we good? Close the vote. Amen. Declare that it is passed.
All right.
Brother Bird, come back. Brother Bird. So let me thank both Janet Neff, who I'll be seeing, of course, and Bert Glenn. I can only do this because his wife is here. Not only did he welcome me at the Finance Committee meetings, I want you to know we are just in such great hands with the lay leaders that you elect to Senate Council, because, I mean, he would knuckle down and he would ask hard questions, and I'd be like, okay, really? Is this like your money? He handled it just that way. So we are so grateful for you and for your leadership. Thank you so very much.